Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Burrow slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. And connecting with me now, live via Zoom, is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I am coming off a weekend trip to Orlando, just scouting out the area before the Cavs head there, and took the baby to Disney World for the first time. Had an altogether wholesome weekend, but I still managed, despite all the jokes, despite all the slander about my commitment to watching this team, in spite of my, much to the chagrin of my family and friends around me, I still watched both Cavs games over the weekend, so I was prepared for this podcast.
So you are trying to convince us that you are committed to this team when you left Orlando before the Cavs play in Orlando tomorrow. Is that correct?
Barely a scheduling snafu here, Justin.
You know what? You could have managed that better, but it's okay. The Cleveland Cavaliers, since we last recorded, went 1-3, which, all things considered, I'm pretty okay with it. I mean, the win against the New York Knicks was incredibly important from a scheduling standpoint. The Atlanta Hawks and Dallas Mavericks have both been playing really good basketball lately, and I mean, they do that to some of the best teams in the league. Forget the Cavs in their weakened state, but the Cavs did end up dropping a very frustrating game against the Philadelphia 76ers with Joel Embiid, with James Harden. We were hoping that maybe that would be a rest game for those guys, but
Cavs haven't gotten many of those this season.
No, they haven't, but they have got a lot of apologies after those kinds of games, so that's kind of nice.
Justin, I'm going to push back a little bit. I actually think it paints a better picture about the team heading into these final three games, because I think that against the Mavs they played okay and got Doncic. They got wrecked by an elite talent. I thought the Hawks game was one of the worst of the season from an attitude perspective. They seemed completely beaten down, felt like their heart was never really in that one, and they got run off the floor in pretty short order. So to see them come out against New York, kind of rediscover their mojo a little bit, kind of a wire-to-wire winner, and then go and give Philly the game they gave them, despite all the things that, drove us crazy. I actually think in a way that's kind of better, because I won't lie to you, just, we've talked about it, about swimming upstream and how they've had to do it for so long, and how, part of my concern has been like, when do they just run out of gas? And, if you were of a certain mindset, that Atlanta game might have been the indicator of, the tap out, and they didn't. And again, the Knicks game was huge to win. It's a terrible shame they didn't win the Philly game, because it really would have secured their place in the 7 spot.
Pretty much, yeah.
But, ultimately, I thought that much like their last loss to Philly, maybe the loss prior. It was the loss prior.
No, it was the last one.
Okay.
The last two have been in Cleveland, and both kind of came down
after the Raptors game. And that was the 2-game stretch where I was like, okay, they're back. And then, of course, both their bigs got hurt, and then everything kind of fell apart again on them due to injuries. But, again, it felt like an encouraging loss to Philly for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with your assessment of the Hawks game as well. It did feel like their confidence was kind of shaken. And I think there was actually parallels between the Lakers game, the Mavericks game, and the Hawks game, where Mobley was in foul trouble a lot of the Lakers game. He just flat out didn't have a great game either on the defensive end of the floor. So you were left in a position where you didn't have a lot of front court players that were plus defenders. And when you're playing against someone that has the passing vision of LeBron James or Luka Doncic or Trae Young, every one of those lapses or slow rotations is going to be punished. And Dallas especially, they were playing 5 out a lot of that game. And when the only front court player you have that is a plus defender is Lamar Stevens, and he's trying to D up Luka or he's trying to D up Trae Young, that can be quickly exploited as soon as that screen comes. And if it's Dorian Finney-Smith playing 5 out and stretching the floor there, like Atlanta did the same things to us as it did to Brooklyn. and like they've been playing really good basketball lately. So it really felt like a shift from the Cavs are more than the sum of their parts to the Cavs not having enough parts. And I think without Mobley and Allen, some of whether or not they're going to be competitive is going to be matchup dependent. I think the Knicks and even the Sixers to some extent were easier matchups because those teams don't necessarily have the ability to go 4 or 5 out like some of these other teams. But I definitely agree that it does feel like they started to find a little bit more of their chemistry. They're learning to make the adjustments they need to play shorthanded. And I think that is a positive sign because really, what at the end of the day, when this season is over, how they respond to these losses, the adjustments they make, and the experience from each of these games matters more than any of the individual results. Whether they make it to the playoffs themselves, whether they are competitive in a series, whether they're knocked out in the play-in, what they learn from this stretch matters way, way more to the long term of this team because at the end of the day, this is still a developmental year.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, in your opinion, should they be better than they are right now? Because one part of your brain goes, well, yeah, they're missing their best 2 players, but they lots of teams are down 2 players and they're still winning games at a decent ship. Or does the fact that they're both their starting center and their backup center functionally in Mobley, along with their starting power forward, kind of tilt the scales? Because I've been trying to figure that out myself lately.
I think it tilts the scales because honestly, like even if they had Dean Wade, that's a front court player that is a plus defender. Like Moses Brown, I really like the energy he's bringing. I think what he brings in the pick and roll really opens up the game for LeVert and Garland. I don't think it's a coincidence that LeVert started playing better as Moses Brown was getting more minutes. But when you don't have the front court personnel that are plus defenders, you are going to be vulnerable. I know coming from me, this is going to sound like shade, but the difference between the Cavs without Mobley and the Raptors without Scotty Barnes is the Cavs don't have anyone else that does what Mobley does defensively. Mobley is really filling a need, whereas the Raptors have a lot of guys that can do exactly what Scotty Barnes does. Like all they have is 6'9" versatile defenders that can guard all 5 positions. The Cavs don't have another Evan Mobley in waiting that can, go out there and just fill in that exact same role. And as much as Moses Brown can replicate some of what Jared Allen brings on the offensive end of the floor, you still see he misses some dunks. He doesn't have the same timing. On the defensive end of the floor, he can get lost and all of a sudden his back is to the ball. Like he's a very, very raw prospect and probably also a very helpful reminder of this is what centers typically look like in their early 20s on the defensive end of the floor. They don't usually look like Evan Mobley and Jared Allen.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Those two are very, very smart defenders. Which is funny because that's something I talked about at the beginning of the season with Jared is like, can you get from guy who can block shots to a legitimate deterrent? And again, snuffing out actions, snuffing out shots before they happen. And, you can really see the leap he's taken just by contrast. Because ultimately you look at what this current team is missing. It's that deterrent. And they are very, very, very reactive right now. They're often put on the back foot. Sometimes they're able to scramble out of it. Sometimes they're not. And, I do think that and to be clear, I think I agree with you, because part of me is like, am I being excusey? That's really what I'm trying to evaluate is.
And
am I being a baby? Like, am I cutting the team too much slack in terms of, just pinning a lot of it on injuries? But it's just so hard to lose such a vital position group. And as I've talked about a lot of times, in my opinion, the very identity of the team in that pairing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Cavs' identity is funneling offensive players into their defensive guys and then using those stops to get out in transition, just kind of build upon that momentum. And that's where those Cavalanches start, right? Where it's Mobley and Allen getting the stops, them either bringing the ball up the floor themselves in the case of Evan Mobley, and using that to generate offense. You can't do that right now. And frankly, like, they don't even have necessarily like the 3-and-D wings that can slide over to the 4. And all of a sudden you're playing like a small ball where we've got all these guys that can maybe fill in that role like a Memphis Grizzlies.
It's really right? Just Lamar.
It really is just Lamar. And like when you're talking about the two guys on this team that are really kind of 3-4, just in a vacuum, good defensive players and can defend on an island, it's Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade. And you're missing one of those guys. And it's crazy to say that about your two undrafted players, whereas Lauri Markkanen and Kevin Love, they have played with effort and like they've played in the right positions defensively, but they have physical limitations when they're out there defending in space. So I was going through the same calculus as you, trying to figure out, okay, am I cutting them too much slack? Like, what are kind of the adjustments that I would go out and make? One thing I suggested was going into the Knicks game, I tweeted out, hey, maybe this is a spot where you want to go to Ed Davis, because then at least you have a higher baseline on the defensive end of the floor. You know he can set screens. Luckily, JB Bickerstaff knows more than I did, and that was a matchup where Moses Brown was able to be more effective, especially when you're not going up against like a great playmaking guard. Like RJ Barrett can pass, but he's not like Luka or Trae Young or LeBron. Same with Emmanuel Quickley. And Tyrese Maxey wasn't able to be as effective as he has been in past matchups because JB Bickerstaff made a very smart adjustment of putting Isaac Okoro on him to start the game.
Yeah, I really did see that as well. And it was actually, I feel like that was one of my big takeaways is, hey, we finally slowed that little guy down, because he was the reason they lost the last couple meetings legitimately. Yeah. Obviously, Embiid is Embiid, and he's going to get his 30 to 40 points, and especially without Jarrett and Evan, it's going to be an even more uphill battle. But you can't let Maxey kill you. And frankly, like at this point, based on what Harden is in terms of his explosiveness on the ball, it kind of makes more sense to throw Okoro at him, especially in this stretch where Lamar is still playing big minutes, and you can kind of split the difference.
And if this results in Philly being the team the Cavs face in the first round, like I think that's something you go to, because reality is if James Harden doesn't have the ball, he's going to stand around. And he's less of a threat to backcut LeVert and, kind of expose some of the lapses that he may have on that defensive end of the floor. So I thought putting Okoro on Maxey was a real smart thing. Obviously, the normal frustrations from playing Philadelphia were there. It's frustrating that anytime there's a lull, they can just throw their body into someone and get a call, especially when, hey, you're down 10 and this might get away from you. And every team goes through those lulls, and I wish the Cavs would be able to do the same thing. But it's what I hate about those games is I understand that the name on the back of the jersey can dictate some of that stuff, but it's just so frustrating to go through those kind of stretches where, hey, this is your fourth game in 5 days. This should be a scheduled loss, even if you're fully healthy. And Philly was in a very similar situation with their third and fourth games, but at the same time, you go out there, you earn it, and the last 2-minute report comes out once again and says that Darius Garland was fouled, which was very obvious in real time, and Lauri Markkanen was grabbed by James Harden prior to the ball being inbounded. 2 calls that could have dramatically changed the outcome of that game, and it didn't go their way.
It is obviously frustrating. Last 2-minute report already confirmed what our eyes told us, that the calls were blown. JB was about as vociferous as we've heard him all season saying, hey, the refs took that game from us.
Well, the worst part is there wasn't a call made on either of those plays, so it wasn't challengeable, which made it even more frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and it's again an uphill battle, and they're probably gonna need a little help just because 2 of their last 3 games are against such tough competition in Brooklyn and Milwaukee. Now they should be able to beat either of those teams on any given night, especially if they get Evan and Jarrett back. Already ruled out for Orlando, but they would now have 4 full days of healing to go play Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, Atlanta's right on their heels. Charlotte's right there too. I think Brooklyn, you're pretty safely out. I mean, they're up 2.5 on Brooklyn. It's really just Atlanta at 1.5 that we have to be really afraid of. Atlanta has the tiebreaker, right?
Yeah, so Atlanta has the tiebreaker, and Charlotte would have the tiebreaker because by merit of, like, if they were able to catch the Cavs in the win department, that means they would have a better record in conference. So there's no real way to have the tiebreaker. It's just uneven scheduling there. Basically, if the Cavs, obviously the Orlando game is basically a must win. Like you have to get that game, even with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley being ruled out. You have to feel better about it now that the Cavs are kind of adjusting to life without those guys and finding ways to win. Garland and LeVert playing better together, I think, is one of the more significant developments we've seen over the last week. But assuming you get that Orlando win, at that point, if you only have one win, Atlanta needs to go 2-2 in order to stay in the 7th seed. And they play Toronto, Washington, Miami, and Houston. If the Cavs only win the Orlando game, Charlotte and Brooklyn can go 3-1. And you would still stay in the 7th seed. But if either of them runs the table, which Brooklyn does have a relatively easy schedule, obviously the head-to-head against the Cavs might end up determining that. But if those teams go 3-1, if they drop one game and the Cavs get a win, they stay in the 7th seed. So obviously there's still a relatively wide range of outcomes. These teams don't play one another, so it's possible you get multiple things. You might have Atlanta run the table or go 3-1, and Brooklyn runs the table and puts the Cavs all the way down to 9. Like, you can't rule anything out, and that's why that Philly game is so frustrating. But they are still in control of their own destiny, which is important. I mean, 2 wins basically would lock up this 7 seed.
How much does it matter to you that they hold on to 7?
I mean, it's my preference.
I think it's really important. They are not the same team on the road as they are at home.
Well, you don't want to be in a scenario where you're playing game 1 against Atlanta in Atlanta. That's a tough environment. You're not going to be at your best because it's going to take an adjustment period to once again play with Mobley and Allen. And if you lose that game, I would assume you'd host a game against Brooklyn. I mean, anything can happen in a 1-game setting, but that is a very, very tough road. And again, it's frustrating that they're in this situation. I think everyone understands that injuries are a primary driver of this. And I don't know about you, Carter, but it's kind of left me feeling bitter the last couple of weeks. Like, I understand that this doesn't have any significant impact on the long term of this team, but it's just really frustrating to me, just like on a personal level, to have, okay, this is the fun, found money season, but before any of the expectations come, it's all about the learning experience. It still is a developmental year. Let's see them go through these adjustments and clear these hurdles. It's frustrating to go from all the success they've had to put in this situation as a result of injuries. Like, I understand it's valuable experience, but at the end of the day, like, I still have to sit there as a fan and be frustrated knowing that a lot of these results would be different if the Cavs had their full supply of guys.
Justin, it's like we've always said, the plan was a terrible idea.
No, I'm
just kidding.
Even if the Cavs missed the playoffs as a result of it, I think this experience over the last couple of weeks is so valuable to this team. I think it's worth it. I honestly do. I think it's made the product better.
I want to talk about worth it as a concept, because I got into a little interaction with a member of the Heat Beat squad, Hot Take Harry. And I was complaining about the call in last night's game. And, I mentioned it was a crucial game for the Cavs. And he says, is it crucial if you're losing in the first round anyway? So I'm not trying to be a jerk, but the call hurts a lot more if these were the first half Cavs. And I said, first off, you are trying to be a little bit of a jerk. And he acknowledged that. Yeah. But I said, making the first round still matters. I think it matters that these guys get reps in a playoff environment because next year, which is going to be a year with much more expectations, I really don't want to see them getting shell-shocked in the first round because they're all of a sudden experiencing playoff intensity for the first time. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of mentioned, I don't think getting swept is that valuable. But I really want to kind of fixate on him saying that the call hurts a lot more if this were the first half Cavs. And I wondered, in your opinion, has the team's playoff ceiling this season changed that much if everyone's there? If Mobley's back and not limited, if Jarrett's back and not limited?
I think it changes a bit because if the Cavs are in the top 4 of the Eastern Conference, you are likely getting an easier opponent. Like you might be getting Chicago, you might be getting Atlanta.
Then let
Charlotte.
Me reframe. Is their on-court potential just as being a good basketball team lower than it was in the first half of the season?
I mean, a little bit, because you've lost Colin and you lost Ricky, and I think no matter what, that was going to have an impact on it. I still stand by what we said at the end of January when the Cavs were tied for the most wins in the Eastern Conference. This is still probably like 4 years away. That's just the reality of the NBA. Like your primary guys are still very, very young. A lot of these guys are younger, like Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Isaac Okoro. Some of these guys are younger than the players in tonight's championship game in the NCAA. Like it's a learning experience. So I don't think it's shifted in a dramatic way. Like I still think there are ways away from contending and there's a lot of lessons you need to learn. But at the end of the day, like there is still a shift, obviously, with those guys going out. But the one thing I'll note is I think you're going to be getting that experience no matter what, because when you're playing a 1-game playoff scenario, you're basically facing a game 7 against a team that's been there in the Atlanta Hawks or the Brooklyn Nets. Like, and especially if you play both of those teams, you are going against teams that have that experience and you're going to be playing against that level of intensity. And if you and I are bitter that the season went this way, well, imagine how the Cavs players are feeling, because these are all hardworking guys. And I guarantee you, every single person on an NBA roster is more competitive than you or I am, or anyone listening to this podcast, because of what it takes to actually make it in the NBA. Sometimes guys will stand out relative to their peers, but these guys have put that work in. So I think this experience, no matter what, it's going to be fuel for them next year. I'm still somewhat optimistic if Mobley and Allen get back that they can give these teams a run for their money, but I don't think that there is like some dramatic shift. I think that growing pains were going to be coming up at some point this year, no matter what.
I don't think I care about their mentality or their fuel. I'm not that's not interesting to me, frankly. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to me is, okay, I've played Eric Spoelstra in a 7-game series. Mm-hmm. And stuff that worked for me early in the series isn't working anymore. How am I supposed to get through that? That's the kind of thing that I want to see out of a first-round series. If they don't win a single game, I still think you learn a lot by going through that grind of intensive game prep, intensive, serious tendency learning, serious scouting. Adjusting to that scouting being done to you. That's what I care about. I'm not worried about their motivation. I know that they have plenty to learn and that they're not that close. And that's why I do very, very passionately want to see them find a way into the playoffs and win one of these 2 play-in games. In terms of their ceiling, I actually think they should. And I think when most people are talking about first half Cavs, they're actually talking about the post-Colin injury Cavs. just because that's been such an extended part of the season without him. And I think that this team, Ricky has definitely been better than Karras, but not in a way that if I thought the team had a legit chance to really bother one of these good teams in the second round through 2.5 months ago, I think that logically I should still feel the same way. I think this team has all the pieces to be annoying to a really, really good team. As you noted correctly, they are much less likely to get a cupcake in the first round now that they're not a 2 or a 3 seed.
Yeah.
But by the way, they were probably never going to get a cupcake because all these teams that leapfrogged them were the 5, 6, 7 seeds prior. So I just think ultimately, I think that this team should not let the last month diminish their expectations of themselves. I think this is a team that could absolutely take 2-3 games off any of these top 4 seeds, probably with the exception of Milwaukee, because I think they're an absolute buzzsaw. But this is not the old days where if you're a top seed, you are just nigh unbeatable. Yeah. Every single one of these teams has really interesting flaws, pretty much except Phoenix.
Yeah.
And those weaknesses can be exploited. We are in the post super team era as far as I'm concerned, because there are no perfect teams and imperfect teams get beaten all the time.
Yeah. No, I think that's really well put. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult reintegrating Mobley and Allen. It's positive that they're traveling with the team, as our buddy Evan Damerol mentioned. Teams don't have players travel with them unless they're ramping up, getting ready to play. So personally, optimistic that, hey, maybe we're going to see them on Friday against Brooklyn. And I think that would be great. But there's going to be an adjustment period to that. And I do think the adjustments they've had to make on the fly this year really, really matter. I think Garland learning to navigate all this stuff is going to pay off dividends in the long term. And I'm just hopeful that they get the experience. But I got to tell you, man, that's the bitterness I feel about being in this situation, when I feel like if they were healthy, it would not be this way. It's bringing out all my worst tendencies as a fan.
Is it, Justin?
It truly is. I'm sitting there and it's this stupid stuff of the mentality of always being in kind of one of those cursed sports cities, or one of those overlooked flyover towns like Winnipeg is. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, the name on the back of the jersey matters too, but it feels like the name on the front of the jersey matters, and just all the kind of fan stuff that I try to polish out when we go on there on the podcast just starts seeping in. But at the end of the day, I want Philly. Give me them, Carter. Give me them.
Justin. We can't belabor the point. We can't belabor the point any further, but no, I don't want it for you. Though a lot of people share your sentiment, I'll tell you that much. A lot of Cavs Twitterers are like, no, we can beat this team. And there is some fun to be had there. We should talk about a guy who's been, pretty maligned early in his Cavs tenure, in Karis LeVert, who in his last 5, he had 17 against Chicago, really strong game. Then Orlando had his worst game of the year, where it felt like, oh man, we're really dipping down. Had 8 points on 15 shots. Then Dallas.
He was good in the fourth quarter, though. I think he found a little bit of something in the fourth quarter.
Maybe. He had 32 against Dallas, 9 in the Atlanta stinker where no one played well, 19 against New York, and 18 against Philly. Really carried them in the first half against Philly. What are you seeing from Karras? Do you think he's getting more comfortable? The big number that's jumping out to me is straight up shot attempts, because he's playing big minutes and getting his shots up, and I think he's looking a lot more comfortable. And then also the assists.
Yep. Yeah, I really do think it started in that fourth quarter against Orlando, where it just seemed like he was starting to get a little bit more decisive, drawing the attention of the defense, the drop-off passes and the pick and roll, all the kind of stuff we've seen over the last 4 games. I think it started in that fourth quarter against Orlando. And one of the biggest things for Caris LeVert is I think he's simplified his game. Like, there's less dancing with the basketball. It's make a couple moves and go. If it's not there, give the ball up and let's reset. I've been... Obviously, some of this is just he's getting comfortable. He's getting back in game shape, all the stuff that we noted when he missed that time. But I do think he is getting more comfortable. I think him and Garland are learning how to play off one another. And really, that's one of the more significant things because we're in this play-in situation. The chance to really move up to 6 probably went away with that Philly loss. So we're in this reality. We're going to be playing for our lives at some point next week. We need Caris LeVert to be at his best. And I think steps towards that is really, really meaningful because if we're going to have the firepower to beat some of these teams, you need consistent offense for 48 minutes. And the fact that JB Bickerstaff is playing Garland and LeVert together and kind of using LeVert as the de facto backup point guard at times, I think that gives them the best chance to have sustained offensive success.
I do think that the backup point guard era is probably over. Now that Rondo's back, he is definitely back in the rotation. Played 14 minutes against Philly, and I thought it looked pretty solid. Made a few really nice passes. God, yeah. He makes some passes even Darius can't make. Like just in terms of the way he puts English on the ball. God, but ultimately, I think you really nailed it. That putting him with Moses a little bit more and giving him a downhill threat that can screen for him. With something like he's not known, like the kind of the book on him was can get tunnel vision, but can make the first pass. He's not an excellent skip passer. He's not going to pass guys open, but he can make the first pass. And that's what a great vertical threat does for you. It's just right freaking there in front of your face.
He's a very good pick and roll ball handler, right?
Yeah. And I think that he is getting 1 or 2 steps deeper on his floaters. 15 footers are becoming 12 footers, 8 footers are becoming 5 footers. And when you're as big as he is, a 5-foot floater is literally just a layup. That is not a floater anymore. When you actually have wing size. I mean, we see a guy, obviously not comparable players, but we see guys like Doncic kind of get into that short middle ground, and it's just so easy for them because they can just rise above whoever's guarding them and just put it up with touch. So I feel like he's getting to his spots a lot better, and there's just, to your point, a lot less dancing and a lot less just starting possessions from scratch.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like Moses Brown has helped a lot. If Moses just got a few of those lobs to go down or finishes in tight, like it could have been a different outcome. And as frustrating as it is to have those calls go against the Cavs, once again, they could do a lot still to not put themselves in those positions and make their free throws and make those in close shots. Like it might just require, hey, you need a higher level of consistency. And I think that's going to be one thing that I'm taking from this season is, especially for the first 55 games or so, the
model of consistency.
The effort level was so damn high at all times. And you look at a team like Memphis Grizzlies, and I said last year that I feel like Memphis is a team 1 year ahead of the Cavs in the development cycle. What Memphis has is a lot of depth that plays hard at all times. They're not at a point where, okay, we have depth, so we can coast throughout the game. We're going to take control in the fourth quarter. We'll turn it up and we'll close out this win. That's not the way they play. They play, we have enough bodies to play hard for 48 minutes. We can go out there and battle every single possession and just be relentless and keep that compete level up.
If we want to rest, we'll rest in the mid fourth quarter when we're up 30.
Exactly. And we can also rest because we can sub guys in and out and not play them in as long shifts because every single person is going to go out there and play hard. And I think that is the type of basketball that the Cavs are trying to emulate. Like JB is obviously a defense first coach, but I think before defense comes effort. effort and activity. If you're going out there and you're playing hard, you are going to get your opportunities. Like Kevin Love, Larry Markkinen, they are not good defenders, but they go out and they play hard and they're doing what's being asked of them. And Moses Brown is the same way. Like, he is at this point a defensive liability, but he's going out there and he's playing hard. I mean, you look at that possession he had at the start of the game where he basically got like 3-4 offensive rebounds and tiptoed along the baseline to save a ball, and like just constant activity. Like, I really do feel like that, more than defense, more than anything, is the Cavs philosophy is we're going to bring in hard workers and we're going to outwork people. And I think that is part of the cumulative fatigue that we've seen, is when guys went down, all of a sudden you're playing more minutes, playing really hard, and it's tough to sustain that if you don't have the depth. And honestly, like, that can open you up to other injuries when all of a sudden the injury situation is snowballing and you're playing more minutes with fewer people. It's more likely that those guys get hurt. So I think depth and consistency of effort is two of the biggest things that I identify going into next year.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. And I do want to ask about one of those effort guys, Lamar Stevens.
Oh, baby.
He's been so very good as of late. I want to ask you, once Mobley and Allen are back, and assuming the Cavs hold on to their 7 or 8 seed and are playing a couple playing games, hopefully a playoff series, should this man be in the playoff rotation?
Yes. I think Lamar is playing well enough that
I want to make you name him. Who's in the rotation? Do you go 9 deep, 10 deep? Because it gets hard once you start naming them. That's why I'm going to make you.
So I think to simplify this rather than list out names, I think I have more confidence in him in the rotation over Jetty.
So you got your starting 5. You got Kevin. You got Rondo. That takes you to 7.
I think Lamar's the next.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, I guess it wouldn't be that, because you also have to factor in LeVert, whether he's starting or not.
Yeah,
that kind of remains to be seen.
So that gets you to 8. So your 9th man is Lamar.
Yeah, my 9th man would be Lamar, and I think I would go 9 deep, because I think Lamar plays with that kind of compete level that I'm talking about, and it's nice to see that his game has evolved a little bit, where he does have some juice offensively, where he's willing to take it to the basket, and he's got that mid-range jumper.
That block on Embiid ended up getting the miss and getting the and one, which is painful. But that block on Embiid, I was like, man, this dude is fearless.
Yeah. Yeah, like he plays really, really hard, and he took that shot over Embiid at the free throw line in a really crucial moment. Like, there's a decisiveness to Lamar's game that I find really refreshing, and I mean, there's a lot of what he's doing on the offensive end of the floor in terms of kind of consistency that I'd like to see from Isaac. Like, I really do think that, like, the nights where Isaac Okoro is going out there and he's being assertive and he's taking shots, the Cavs are a better basketball team. Like, we know he makes an impact, but he's almost in that Garland spot where the nights where he's being assertive and he's taking advantage of the opportunities and he's seeing the game better, it takes the Cavs to another level. But there's other nights where it feels like he's trying to not rock the boat and he's trying to play good team basketball. And some of that deference he's showing to other teammates is putting them in a tougher position, because reality is when they are shorthanded, you need a little bit more of Isaac Okoro.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that ultimately Stevens has earned his minutes, and you're right, Isaac continues to be a little maddening, Justin.
I mean, let's put it this way. Lamar has had 7 games where he's had double-digit field goal attempts. Isaac's had 6. And Okoro's been a more constant presence in this rotation. And like
he plays 30 he plays 30 minutes a game. Lamar plays, drum roll, 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure if you asked Isaac, he'd be the first to admit, yeah, I need to be a little more active with the cuts. I need to find my spots. I need to push the ball in transition. And against the Knicks, he was a big part of that win. Like, he was playing very good defense. He was very assertive on the offensive end of the floor. And I really do feel like we've learned a little bit with the Darius experience where we had questions like, okay, he's now a 14-5 guy, but he's passing up so many open opportunities. He's leaving a lot on the table. And the question was, is it a mentality thing? Is that something you can ever change? And I think Isaac, like Darius, is someone that really kind of prioritizes team basketball and doing the right things. And I'm hopeful that as the skill set develops, that he is going to be more assertive and have more confidence in what he's doing on the basketball court. But I mean, it's one of those situations where Isaac being on a normal developmental curve when some of these other guys are ahead of schedule, it stands out a little bit more, right? Which I don't think you necessarily need to write him off on the long term or anything along those lines. But the reality is, especially when they're shorthanded, they need more from him more consistently.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, and the thing that's really makes it tough is you don't want to take him off the floor. Because of his value defensively, and the way
frankly, you can't. Like, you can't. I mean, like he still has a significant impact in the Cavs rotation.
Yeah. And like I think that the Cavs don't have anyone else they can throw at a guy like Tyrese Maxey, and just say go shut his water off, make him have a hard night. So like again, I just want to continue to see the volume go up. He just. Like, I feel like it almost has to be a message from JB that just says, hey, no more 2 field goal nights. Like, if you're open, you need to shoot. Like, don't make bad plays, obviously, but like every time, every time you don't do this, we're going to have a talk. Because there are plays he's making where the read feels pretty good, He can make, he's just a little too invisible right now. I especially in that Philly game, he got to the line 6 times, which was encouraging. I do feel like his free throw rate has. This is not sourced at all. I do feel like his free throw rate has just been anecdotally trickling up just a smidge.
Yeah, 28% last year, 36% this year.
But yeah, I just think ultimately we do want to continue to see him grow that side of the ball because it's too inconsistent right now, and it's just hard to win games against great teams when one of your starters plays 30 minutes and takes 2 shots.
Yep. And I totally agree. Like, it's one of those situations where, like, I compared it before to Tristan Thompson, right? Where if you're asking him to be part of a team that has kind of the catalyst, the guys that are going out there and making the plays and the offense is humming, he fills in the gaps perfectly. He's such an intelligent player. He brings something to the table that the Cavs don't have, which is really, really high and on-ball defense, especially when it comes to defending guards. He's a much better defender of guards than Lamar is. Lamar, I think his strength lies more with defending forwards and larger players. But you want to see that growth from him, and maybe that's something that's going to take more work in the offseason. This is going to be the first kind of real normal offseason that they've had, and there's a lot of film. I'm sure there's a lot of things that the coaching staff is going to point to and opportunities and film that he kind of left on the table, and that's why it's so important to be playing in these games where every single game matters, and you're playing a lot of teams that are fighting for positioning as well. Defenses are going to play you differently than they did in April and May of last year, where the Cavs were out of it. No one was game planning for the Cavs, and it's just kind of a free-for-all. We're learning what good teams like Philly, like Atlanta, what Dallas does to an Isaac Okoro when there's no other options on the floor. And I think that that's going to be really instructive and important for his development in the summer.
Yeah, I totally with you. And his story is not written. I think a lot of people think it is.
Yeah. He's a couple months older than Mobley.
Yeah, and like
simple.
I see enough to keep me interested for sure. I think what he is now is pretty fine and pretty solid. Especially against, as a regular season player, but we've seen players like him get attacked by defensive game plans. In the postseason, where they go, okay, we're going to just completely ignore this guy. Like, if we kind of ignore him in the regular season, we're going to, completely overload the off side of the floor and see if he can beat us.
Yep.
And that's going to be a challenge for him. So I'm really excited. I do think before we go, though, we have to talk about a roster move the Cavs made, Justin.
Yeah, RJ Nembhard got the final roster spot. That was something we definitely saw coming, right?
Yeah, I don't think either of us at any point considered that he would be the guy.
No, and both of us liked him, his brief kind of stint with the Cavs. But given the fact that he's been playing with the Cleveland Charge for the majority of this year, this was not something I saw coming. Now, he had great timing with a 42-point performance right after the contract news broke. I think he had like 42 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 assists, if I'm remembering correctly. Like, that's that's a pretty awesome stuff. But definitely a big surprise. And obviously, I don't have any inside information on why that decision was made. The Cavs have done a really good job, I think, over the years, utilizing the G League for development and keeping guys there. Like Dean Wade played primarily in the G League kind of his first year, and they really valued getting him the reps so that he was ready to contribute. And you have to assume that it's a very similar situation with RJ Nembhard, where I guess reality is, like, I think what Brandon Goodwin brings to the table is nice. I think he's given them a lift at times. But when you're talking about playoff basketball, he's not in my rotation. Moses Brown isn't in my rotation. And if the Cavs are injured to a point where they need one of those guys in the rotation, you're not going to be learning much from having them in the game. Like, that's all she wrote. Like, if Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are out in the playoffs, we're not being competitive. Like, I just can't see it. So I kind of understand it from that standpoint, but we'll need to see how this plays out. Like, this definitely was a surprise move, and I'm interested to see how they kind of navigate the contract situations. I like giving Moses Brown a two-way spot. I think he's a really interesting development project for them. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's just interesting, you know. I think we both really, I mean, we have certainly seen more from Goodwin and Brown on the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball court in a Cleveland Cavaliers uniform than we've seen from Nembhard. And they have several wings that they've chosen to play ahead of Nembhard. Mm-hmm. You know, even Windler, who is, you know, who has obviously been in the doghouse more than he's not been, is certainly been ahead of Nembhard in the rotation. So it's surprising. Yeah. I'm interested to see what the cat, because like the reality is we don't even have much to react off of, just because we've barely seen the guy play basketball. Mm-hmm. I like the body. I like the way he reads the game in pick and roll. The jump shot is not there at all right now. And it might
Which is probably why he was in the G League. You look, and he was taking over 5 threes a game, and I think some of that is you're not going to get those reps playing with the Cavs, so go out there and fire away, take the open shots, and let's see if we can develop that aspect of your game, because like the impression I get with RJ Nembhard is he's someone that does bring a lot of things to the table. The jumper is the swing thing, right? Like, if the jumper starts falling, okay, now you've got a big guard that can do some playmaking, that plays defense and is somewhat explosive. Add the jumper, and all of a sudden you have yourself a player. And you look at the G League stats, 22 games, he averaged 24.1 points, almost 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. Like that's a big guard that can do a lot of things. So you would hope that with the Cavs development staff that they can develop the jump shot. But as you said, like, we don't have a lot to go on.
To me, my read is that they're seeing a guy, they know they're a team that's short on prototypical NBA wings. Mm-hmm. And are like, yeah, I think they're probably saying, hey, we can find backup centers on the market, or third string centers on the market. And we even talked about in this last pod, we've talked about a lot of guys who we think could be a really good fit there at the backup 5. Hey, we can find backup 1s. You know, my guy, Raul Neto, is always available for the minimum. And there's always a lot of good players that are available for the minimum, but it's really hard to find decent wings. So maybe Nembhard isn't a decent wing right now, but a couple years in our program, we get him with Coach Olson, teach him how to shoot a little bit, and he might be that kind of guy. So I think that's my read on it, is like, hey, if we're going to take a flyer on anybody, we're going to be taking a flyer on the wing with a slightly shaky jumper.
Yep. And for me, I don't necessarily understand it, but I think the Cavs have kind of earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to finding G League guys or finding guys on the 10 days or undrafted players. Like when you look at Wade, do you look at Steven, do you find Brandon Goodwin off the scrap heap? You bring in Moses Brown. Like it's just player after player that they seem to bring in. So you kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Some of these gambles are going to work. Some of them aren't. We'll see which category this falls into, but I have to imagine that they still are maintaining a lot of flexibility, that if they do need to waive Nembhard and they go in a different direction, like that's not going to be an issue. So we'll see how this plays out. But yeah, I don't have a lot of takes when it comes to RJ Nembhard because I just honestly haven't seen him play, and I can filibuster and I can read off the stats and all that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, just not a player that I'm very aware of.
Nope. And that goes to tell you something, because we're pretty aware of most Cavaliers. So we'll
Yes,
we'll
we
see
are.
how it goes, and I'm excited to learn more about the guy.
Me too, man. And I'm a little excited, but a little nervous for this game against Orlando. I know they're not playing for much. I know the Cavs are
You
playing a
don't
lot
like
better.
must wins with down your two best players, or two of your three best players. Sorry.
Especially because things can get so weird in a one-game scenario. Which,
Sure
you know,
can.
like,
That's why I'm afraid of the play-in, but we're there. We're heading there. Let's go. Absolutely, Justin. My internet just died at the most inopportune time, but we're back, baby.
I noticed that.
It keeps happening, man. It keeps happening. I got to talk to my dear friends at Spectrum and see if we can't get someone investigating this, because I can't keep catching these owls on the Cavs official YouTube channel.
Tough scene, my friend. Very, very tough scene. But I'm going to take that as a sign that we need to wrap this thing up. So big thanks to everyone that's tuning in live on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast, leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe in there. And until next time, go Cavs.
Staying
I can't
safe
believe
in there.
out there, in
Yikes.
there, you know, in the world, Carter.
I'll take the blame. I rattled you. Bye, everybody.
Go Cavs.